Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think we can get started. My name is Doug Savage. I'm with the Institute of World Affairs at UWM, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to what is the first of a three-part series looking at the stories and impact of Wisconsin immigrant workers. At the outset, I would like to thank our collaborators on this. The heavy lifting was done by our friends at Alverno, and my UWM colleagues at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies are also joining in the fun. So our subject tonight is human trafficking. Before we get started with that and introduce our speaker, I would like to just remind you that on April 7th, the second in the series, will be hosted at the same time, 4:30, looking at immigrants in the dairy industry. And then on May 12th, the third and final installment will look at immigrants in healthcare during the pandemic. A note on questions, it would be best, I think, if you use the chat function to pose your question, and then when we invite you to pose your question, someone will unmute your mic so you can, in fact, ask it yourself, but just a little bit easier there. So we'd ask you to stay muted until you're recognized. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mariana Rodriguez, who is with an organization I'm sure we all know, the United Migrant Opportunity Services, UMOS, where she serves as the director of Latina Resource Center there. Much of the work that UMOS she does was really as a result of her urging. In 2002, she began offering the bilingual resources for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking. And at the time, it was the first bilingual domestic violence agency in the state. Among her many other accolades, which we don't have time to go into, is her being a recipient of the Milwaukee Business Journal's 2020 Women of Influence Award for Nonprofit Leadership. So with that, I will invite Mariana to open the program.
Thank you so much, Doug, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about something that is I'm very passionate about. And I've been with UMOS, United Migrant Opportunity Services, for going on 21 years, and founded the Latina Resource Center 21 years ago. And everything that has come through the center or from the center has always been around, really elevating the human rights, the protection of our victims, particularly immigrant, undocumented victims who often were not able to access services or did not know that they had rights to report crimes or access services in general. And so human trafficking is one of our programs, and we have multiple programs out of the Latina Resource Center, but human trafficking, the Wisconsin Regional Anti-Human Trafficking Program is a statewide program, and we definitely have learned a great deal about how victims, immigrant workers, for guest workers, how they're experiencing their overall treatment as workers here in the United States, and how they're recruited, actually. And it's been an extremely fascinating learning opportunity for us, because the more that we can learn about workers in the United States, the more we are able to do better in providing response and services for workers who are trafficked. And so, am I able to share my screen right away? Can you see that?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm trying to. Okay, let's see here if I can. Let me, I think I should possibly just, so sorry about that. Let me get share my screen. Can we see that? Can we see the screen?
Yes,
Okay,
now we can.
perfect, perfect.
you.
Sorry about that. So just really quick, UMOS has a very long history of historically advocating for farm workers. UMOS has a humbling beginning actually in just providing resources and services for farm workers. UMOS has been serving the community for over 55 years. And now the agency has evolved to providing services in the areas of employment, education, housing opportunities, and in services for the underserved population. The Latina Resource Center is a program of the overall agency. Where a lot of our work comes with immigrant workers have been around the farm workers, the National Farm Workers Program, our Head Start programs, and we not only serve workers in Wisconsin, but UMOS in general has services or programming and services in Missouri, Illinois, and Texas, and now Florida, actually. So we definitely have, we definitely have a large, a large scale programs that there are about supporting workers. Our program, the trafficking program, although we are primarily in Wisconsin, we have and worked on cases in Missouri and Illinois. So the abuses against farm workers have historically always been well documented through, even through the use of through the U.S. Department of Labor, or even reports to the farm workers programs. But what we have learned over the years is how workers are, the guest workers program, how this has played out in the overall role of trafficking of workers. The change in how we are definitely looking when we are looking at the abuses of farm workers or our workers in the United States is that we are definitely now we have this trafficking federal act in which we can use to determine whether a farm worker is not just going through a very difficult time at work, but that they could potentially be victims of labor trafficking. Our work with labor trafficking is very collaborative. We work with multiple agencies, mostly the National Farm Workers Program, so that we can help and reach out to the farms, dairy farms, agricultural farms throughout the state of Wisconsin and Missouri, to be able to reach out to the potential victims of trafficking. We work with state monitors, farm workers, legal aid programs, foreign labor certification programs, so that we can definitely get all the resources that we need to help those foreign workers or undocumented workers that are being abused or trafficked. In addition, we have great ties with immigration attorneys that really help in protecting the rights of workers and determining whether they're eligible for the T visas, which we'll talk a little bit about. So overall, the partnerships and the relationships that we built over the years has become a game changer in the state of Wisconsin around labor trafficking. When I first started this program over 10 years ago, all of what people were focusing on was sex trafficking, and not that it's not, an important issue, but human trafficking encompasses not only sex trafficking, but labor trafficking. And I often was kind of like the lone wolf trying to bring that awareness in on the table of the state around how we're going to respond to victims of human trafficking. And labor trafficking was just one of those that was really difficult for people to grasp a true understanding of that. And and people were often saying that's not happening in Wisconsin. Show us the numbers. And it was really difficult for people to really truly understand how this could play out and why Wisconsin is a hotspot for labor trafficking. So what makes Wisconsin, a perfect state for, invulnerable for these situations for trafficking? We're looking at three very specific things. We have great highway systems where you can be able to transport people throughout the whole state and into the state. There are no checkpoints for immigration. There's no checkpoints really that can stop buses and check out buses. And overall, accessible, out in exits and very connected to small communities, rural communities. So we have really good highway systems that make it very accessible to move people throughout the state. The state has a very rich agricultural industry. And we also have hospitality industry and tourism. Think about Wisconsin Dells, and how a lot of those areas do have foreign workers that are brought in for seasonal work. Overall, Wisconsin is very, the industry, our agricultural industry contributes about $104.8 billion annually to the state's income, to our state's income. We are very rich in farms, and there are about 64,000 farms that are around the state of Wisconsin. And overall, Wisconsin agriculture provides about 435,000 jobs annually. And so, we look at what is, where is it and how is it that what are we producing? Corn is the most important crop. And, snap peas, cranberries, green peppers, cucumbers, Christmas trees, potatoes are all sources of industries in which rely on foreign workers. Also, we definitely, often people don't understand that we rank first in the export of ginseng roots. And so we would think that it's something that it's produced out, externally or internationally. Wisconsin is big in this, and and so again, it's these crops that are definitely dependent on foreign workers. Dairy farms, it is definitely a source of where you will also have specialized visas, the TN visas, in which they bring professional, educated individuals to come and help the development of these dairy farms. So you will see workers that are not just working in milking the cows and feeding the cows and all that and taking care of them, but think about what goes all into running a dairy farm. You need the good soil, you need good feed, you need real sciences in terms of how to produce really clean ways of raising cows. All of those are done by engineers and educated individuals, individuals who may have masters in geography and soil and all of these really very intricate types of profession. Those are also foreign workers, and that's the NAFTA. It's a really specialized visa, which is a NAFTA visa that brings those workers in. And so what makes them really extremely vulnerable, is that often, they are, they definitely are coming from, the workers are coming out from mostly what we're seeing in Wisconsin are Mexican workers in the agricultural field or in some of the guest workers programs. More and more in what we've seen over the year, we're seeing individuals from Honduras, that are being brought in to work in carnivals. And we are seeing more undocumented Nicaraguenses that are working in the dairy farms. And we're gaining this and we're learning this because of our outreach to a lot of these locations. The physical and economic insecurity of immigrants often really put a lot of pressure in really trying to find jobs that are outside outside of their own country of origin. So they are very vulnerable to be tricked in terms of contracts and promises of very specific jobs that can help them bring in a greater income to their families. However, often what we are seeing is that they end up finding themselves that they have to work in order to pay off debts that they were not aware of at the time that they signed on contracts with the contractors, the work contracts. The work contracts. Foreign survivors are often threatened by the traffickers and to keep them very submissive and under control. And often, the victims are highly isolated, and they are often can really become the main source person who communicates with the employer and or law enforcement or anybody that interacts with with the workers. Because of they often don't speak English, it definitely cuts their ability to speak for themselves. And a lot of the workers too, because they also may not speak Spanish, they have their indigenous dialect that makes it even more difficult for them to communicate. Workers don't understand customs and the cultural nuances of coming here, and so they really become very dependent on the trafficker. They definitely listen to what they have to say, because they don't know the laws, they don't know what their rights are as workers, and so the contractor definitely holds all the power. And I think that the last piece is that guest workers programs, the policies in themselves, is the perfect grounds. We can become the perfect grounds to lead to trafficking. And one of the reasons is that once the workers receive a contract, they are only able to, their visa, their work visa, their immigration, their work authorization is only tied to that employer. They cannot leave that employer. So that employer has all the power over that worker. If the worker decides to leave because there is abuses going on, automatically the worker has about 10 days to leave the country, otherwise they're out of status. And it can impact them for any future opportunities for them to come back and work in the United States. And very quickly, there's a great distinction between labor trafficking and labor exploitation. And when we are looking at labor trafficking, we are looking at three very specific, we're looking at force, fraud, and coercion. Those are the three elements in which we are having to look in terms of what is happening, what are the means in which that is occurring, that is keeping that individual in the trafficking situation. Traffic victims have very minimal movement. They are able to, it's very unlikely that they are able just to leave their situation without not experiencing some direct physical harm or non-physical harm, such as this trafficker knows my family in Mexico and can bring harm to my family and or me or anything else. But there's a great deal of threat for the worker. The fear of deportation, not getting paid, the conditions in which they're living, and then the conditions in which they're working, all becomes all part of what encompasses a trafficking situation. Labor exploitation is very different, because there may be some intersectionality that there might be some wage theft, and the working conditions may not be the best for them, or the living conditions. However, an exploited worker is able to leave. They're able to go and find another job. They're able to leave freely without not experiencing the threat of, a physical harm, the threat of a family member being harmed, or having not not being able to find another job, or leave without not feeling that the fear of experiencing the force, fraud, or coercion. There's no real threat a lot of the times. So they can pretty much have that decision to leave without not experiencing much more serious consequences. When we look at labor trafficking, when we determine that there's labor trafficking, we definitely we go based on the federal, the federal definition that is set forth by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. And that is that in labor trafficking, the recruitment, the harboring, transporting, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. And slavery here is defined as the state of being under the ownership or control of someone where a person is forced to work for another. And this is a really, really very, slavery can be a little bit difficult to grasp, but in the cases in which we have seen, the workers, the victims really, really have become owned. They're owned by those contractors or those employers. And in what they're subjected to, it is incredible. It's hard to understand or even see what they have to endure before they leave, or before they are recovered, or and we're able to assist them. So the TVPA of 2000 really became an important law, because now the ability to criminalize trafficking became a reality, where where victims would be able to seek prosecution against the trafficker, be able to retrieve what often is one of the biggest weapons that's used against the workers, and that is to remove their documentation, their visas, their social security, everything. It becomes is taken away from them, and it's in the control of the trafficker. And what a way to keep a worker there, right? If they need that visa to be able to go back to their country, and they need that visa to hopefully be able to come back someday, for another season as a worker. But what a great way to say, we're going to call the police, you're undocumented, and you're going to be taken out of here. It's a powerful, powerful tool. And so that can be a source of how we can build a case of how force has been used, or coercion has been used against the workers. Traffickers can receive up to 10 years to 20 years of prosecution should they be charged with trafficking. Victims can seek restitution, which is a really important for these victims who have lost so much money, and have been taken so much money from them. The other issue is that they can seek protection. They are able to be protected once they engage in the judicial process and they cooperate with law enforcement. That during the time that they are cooperating, that there are legal remedies in which they can that we can bring to, or we can get for them while they stay here, and choose to stay, to prosecute the trafficker. So they're not having to go back to their country. They are able to stay, they're able to work, they're able to make money, and eventually bring their, be reunited with their family if they want to, in the United States. The elements is really interesting when it comes down to trafficking. And so this is just a description here of, what the AMP model is. And we often use, the AMP model when we are looking at cases, and we start to dissect what we have, what we're gathering from our interviews, from our intakes, from our screenings of victims. What is the action? And that means, how were they recruited? Were they harbored? Where was the transportation? And so this is some of the areas in which we really take a look at when we're looking at workers, because often the trafficking, the recruitment doesn't always start in the United States. It reaches all the way to their, into their little towns, where recruiters, employers are going to their towns, specifically telling them about their jobs, getting them signed up, and so the recruitment and the agreement actually starts there. The means were, what type of force was that? And force here, it could be physical harm, sexual assault, restraining them, pushing them, hitting them is one, is an example. Fraud, the false promises regarding employment, the wages, the work conditions, that is one thing we see a great deal in our trafficking cases. The unexpected changes in the work conditions, the debt agreements, and then the coercion, the threats of serious harm, physical restraint, documentation, document confiscation, which is often their visas, and their passports, their work authorization, are things that often is taken from them as soon as they come into the United States. And of course, for the purpose of either commercial sex act, or for a lot of the labor trafficking cases, involuntary servitude, debt bondage. And in most of our cases in which we've seen has been more around involuntary servitude and debt bondage. Peonage is one of that is very related and connected with debt bondage, because often the worker, they start to work to pay off a debt, which they never pay off. The trafficker often keeps changing the amount that supposedly is owed, and not uncommon for workers to say, I worked Monday through Sunday, 5 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, and my check was only $5 because they deducted food, the rent, the staying here, and that I owed them for my visa, and so all of these debts start to happen. And so this worker is working with paying a debt that doesn't even exist. And so where are we seeing a lot of these workers? Well, agriculture is definitely the #1 area where in Wisconsin we're seeing the larger group of victims of trafficking. We are seeing some that are in the dairy farms, restaurants for sure. Carnivals have been, is definitely another area where we are seeing more. And a lot of people don't believe that the carnivals are often foreign workers. And over the past years, they're bringing on more Central Americans to work in those areas where it often used to be, I believe they were more African-born workers. But now there's a lot of change in that. And we've had 2 cases that were carnivals, that were labor trafficking carnival workers. But this is what in some of the areas where labor trafficking may occur, and where foreign workers often are brought into work. So some of the indicators real briefly, and I will definitely make sure that I share the PowerPoint, when we are looking and when we're meeting with individuals, we're always looking for things of, their fear. often workers have this, they're very reluctant to speak to us, but one thing for sure is that the first thing we ask is, how is the work? How are you doing? How's the pay? And we we're able to assess and kind of see how they interact with us. And often we see that they definitely are very fearful of the employer. They are not allowed to talk. There is a person that speaks on behalf of all the workers. Even though we speak Spanish, they're speaking for everybody. They're not allowed to say anything. It's a big indicator for us. They don't have access to their immigration documents. They don't, or they possess a false ID, is a big indicator, because authorized workers have their own, they have their own social security number. They have their own work authorization card. There's no need for them to have a false, anything false with them, unless they are being moved to another state. They fear that they fear law enforcement. They fear, the threats of deportation or even involving law enforcement. They definitely, have experienced some serious deductions from their wages, rent, utilities, recruitment, transportation. All of those things are covered under the H-2A program, under the guest workers program, but yet they're still are still charged, and they're still working to pay out those debts, which they should not be. So these are just some of the indicators that we've seen, but I just kind of spoke to some of the more serious ones in which we've gathered from a lot of the workers. So, the more common living and work conditions is, often, they're not allowed to leave their facility. They're not allowed to go and shop for themselves. They're unpaid or paid very little, or their pay is garnished. They work excessively long and unusual hours. Working in a thunderstorm out in the field at 9 o'clock at night, that should not be happening, but that's what they might be subjected to. They're not allowed to take breaks, or if they do, they're penalized and they have to pay the contractor. Food and sleep deprivation. Food is one that we've seen that the traffickers control. They control when they're going to eat lunch, when they're going to eat dinner. We had a case where the men would start to, where their work hours would start at 5 in the morning, but they were not allowed to eat until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because the trafficker didn't want sluggish workers in the field. They needed to harvest the crop very, very early in the morning. And so their first meal was at 2, and then the second meal wasn't until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And that was monitored. They owe large debt, and and they're unable to pay it off. And it keeps going. In the one more evident area that we see is wages. That is the one thing that keeps us back to this, and where we can continue to hold on to kind of help build the case that let's start from here, and we're going to have to piece everything together to know that this is what is occurring. This is the most obvious thing that we can show, and that is the lack of pay. But let's talk about everything else too. The long hours, the fact that they don't know where their work visa is, they don't have their IDs. There's 25 men living in one room. All of these things are things that we look at when we look at the conditions of work, or looking at the conditions of living, how they're living. And water is another one that's really interesting, because often, if you're working out in the field for a very long time, you're thirsty. And if you're in the field, I don't know if anybody's been out there, but they're like miles long. And in order for you to get a glass of water, you would literally have to walk down, another 15 minutes or 20 minutes, losing time to work. But it's a way of how they really control, and it's been amazing to see how hot it is out there. Because if anybody's been out in the fields, the sun, it's directly hitting you from the top, and then the ground in itself is really hot. So the heat comes from both ends. And often they don't, part of the rules of working under the H-2A is that they have to be provided at a certain time shade, or given a break for shade. Otherwise, they could really get sick and die. And there was a case of ours that we worked on out of Georgia, where a worker did die because of the heat. And no matter how much they were asking for help, and they did not provide that, and a young man actually died. And it was a horrible case, and it's still being seen. So I know that I talked a lot about, before, around freedom of movement, but it's really important to know that that victims are always very isolated. They don't know where they are most of the time, let alone how would they go back home if they were to leave in a trafficking situation. And they definitely, if they're not being paid and they don't have the means to go back, how are they supposed to eat or even get a bus or anything to go back? And so, the fear of retaliation from the employer, from the supervisor, is another really big driving factor in which they do not talk, and they don't want to leave or even seek the help that they want to seek. And that often is that these workers that are being brought in, because the contractors know their towns, they're traveling to their town to recruit these workers, they know family. And so that's another area in which they're very afraid. They don't want their family involved in any of this. The guest workers, again, if the contractors move these workers around. So the way to get the guest workers program, now I'll touch that a little bit on there, is that if I have a farm in Wisconsin and I apply for a worker through the guest workers program, that worker is only authorized to work under my agency and is only allowed to work in the state of Wisconsin. They can't work anywhere else. They can't go anywhere else. And if they do that, they're violating the law, the rules and the policies of the H-2A, and that could affect the worker. So often, so this is one of the reasons why it becomes a perfect grounds for that program to for workers to be abused and workers to be trafficked. So again, they don't have access to their identifications or their visas, and so it's really hard for them to just get up and leave when they don't have anything. I'm just putting out some definitions real quick about the different kinds of workers that that we may see here: the seasonal farm workers, the migrant agricultural workers, the J1 workers. So these are all areas and areas of how we may be able to bring individuals into the country. We just put down there the fiance visa, the AK-1 visa, is that there was a young woman who was brought in thinking that she was going to meet up with a partner, and as soon as she was brought here, as soon as she got in the car, the person who she thought was going to be her boyfriend gave her cleaning supplies, gloves, mask, everything, and forced her to work and clean houses and apartments. Very interesting case. But as I was saying before, the H-2A and the H-2B program, is H-2A is strictly for agricultural labor and work. So this is where you're seeing a lot of the agricultural workers. This is a very specialized visa that people can come in. And then the H-2B workers are the non-skilled non-agricultural workers. This is where you see the hospitality workers, the hotel workers, A lot of the Wisconsin Dell workers that are foreign workers are under this H-2B visas. But the process is very tied to immigration. It's tied to Homeland Security and the Department of Labor. And so the worker, so there is information, about the worker, where they're supposed to be working, who is the contractor and the employer where they're supposed to work, and for how long they're supposed to be in the United States. So they're entering legally, and they're entering with the contract, they're entering with the work visa. And so everything's legit. Everything's legit. But the employer, it starts out with the employer requesting these workers. So what we're seeing is like the very big lucrative farms have the middlemen, and those are the contractors. Those contractors are the ones that go in and recruit the workers. Okay. So the workers get paid by the contractor. They don't get paid directly by the farm, by the big farmers, the big agency. They pay out the contractor pays out the workers. So you can imagine how they're not only controlling the movement, the work, everything about the workers, but also the pay. So we definitely, in Wisconsin, we definitely have had, I know we're kind of coming up, we definitely have had pretty, large scale recoveries here in Wisconsin. And so one actually was, it was definitely an agricultural farm. They were workers that were H2A workers. And when we went out and did some outreach, we found out that there were some workers in southern east part of Wisconsin. We went out to see how they were doing, and we found a lot of issues that were very concerning. The workers were showing false IDs, which were very interesting because you could tell that they were made up. The workers were not allowed to talk to us. There was one person speaking on behalf of them. The motel had all of their essentials that they needed so that they would not travel outside. But the cost in which they would have to pay for them was pretty high. And not only that, but these workers were definitely, they were not allowed to take any of the $75 food vouchers that UMOS was providing to the workers. But it was a very unusual situation. We came back, we were able to talk to one worker on a separate day, and what we found was that there were 22 men that were recovered under this particular situation. There were more details to this, but this was a surface indicators that brought us to bring investigative law enforcement and us screening and be able to reach out to the workers. And 22 were recovered. 12 decided to stay in the US and pursue charges against the trafficker. And the US Attorney's Office picked up the case. So when we look at work conditions, or when we look about housing conditions, think about that. We are foreign workers, and we want shelter, right? We want to be able to sleep somewhere. We had a particular case in Missouri in which the trafficker, the contractor, who was a contractor, had bought a jail. This is in Missouri, and was going to convert this to be a H2A boarding house. So he moved workers into this jail. It was formerly a jail, and this is how he set up the housing, the bunk beds. It was all enclosed in a fence. There was no running water. There was no electricity. The only water that was dripping was from the sewage. It was just a horrible, horrible situation. But worst of it all, what we were fighting against too is we were saying psychologically how this is impacting the workers, that they're in a jail, that not only are they working these horrifying hours, they're not getting paid, they're not able to eat, or they're only able to eat twice a day, but now they're forced to live in what looks like what is that was formerly a jail. But this jail was also a haunted house, was used for a haunted house. So when you go in that jail, they had like all of like walls that look like blood. It just was the most craziest environment we've ever seen. And we fought hard to bring law enforcement in there, the Department of Labor and every federal agency to come in to help recover these men. And we definitely were successful at getting these, getting a multidisciplinary group team to help out these workers out of the situation. I don't think I have time to play the video, but I'm just gonna say that that particular contractor was fined. That they had to pay $165,805 of back pay and about $75,000 of penalty for failing to provide meals and pay the wage requirements for the workers. So this is one of the results of how they went after the contractor or the trafficker. Again, when we look at disclosure for these workers, is that what we're seeing over and over again are some common issues here for our workers: fear of deportation. Victims don't identify as victims. They don't trust law. They trust authority, and they are very much unaware of their rights. So some of the legal remedies have been continued presence. This is one that legal federal law enforcement can request while the victims are in the process of investigating and cooperating with law enforcement. This is the fastest way of how we can keep the worker, if they choose to continue to cooperate with the charges against the trafficker. The continued presence allows for the worker to stay here while it's being investigated, while the trafficker is being prosecuted, and they are able to keep their work authorization. They're able to work and access benefits to help them stay here while they are working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Homeland Security, and all of the legal entities to charge those traffickers. And all of our clients in which we worked with, we've been very successful in working with attorneys, immigration attorneys, and us and law entity, federal law officers to get them the continued presence. And of course, the T visa, which is a longer term visa. And the T visa, the trafficking visa, they are able to adjust to permanent residency. And they are able to actually petition for their children or their legal partners to come in and reunite them back here into the United States with them. And we definitely have a couple of cases in which victims have been reunited with their children and their spouses, and they're here in the United States. They're given their opportunity to work and stay in the United States. And once they are in here and they're provided with continued presence or a T visa, they're able to actually access public benefits. So they're able to actually get housing, food share, healthcare, and sometimes they may be able to get cash assistance. And so we definitely advocate for that, and we definitely get them connected to these resources. And again, all of this is tied with the part of the legal immigration remedies for victims of trafficking. So we definitely have 4 federal funded programs to serve victims, and we are able to assist them with crisis stabilization, emergency lodging, food. We can help them pay for rent, able to help them with buying clothes because they left the situation, they don't have anything. We're able to, definitely make sure that they are provided with some of the basic needs while we're trying to identify more long-term resources. And this is also for, even if they're the undocumented trafficking victims who may not be a guest worker, they definitely can tap into these resources. The Trafficking Victims Assistance Program is only specifically for foreign victims of sex or human or labor trafficking. And that is that with the hopes that we are able to get them into a T visa and get them the legal services so that they can adjust. So 12 months per person, they get up to $6,000. For family, they get up to 7,500, assistance in general. So they can be used for housing, for food, for legal services. And then we have our legal assistance grant that is for providing victim representation for victims of sex trafficking or victims of non-intimate partner sexual assault, which is really important because some of the experiences that we had in the dairy farms is a sexual assault, that something that has been happening in some of those dairy farms. And of course, we also have the enhanced collaborative model, and that is a anti-trafficking initiative in which we're working closely with the Division of Criminal Investigation with the Wisconsin Department of Justice. Our programs statewide. These are all the counties in which we are, where victims are able to serve and access these resources. Our referrals come from a lot of areas, everywhere. Law enforcement, human trafficking hotline, the Trafficking Victim Assistance Program, our community partners, National Farm Workers Program, healthcare providers. And, and we're able to really leverage resources, which are really important, so that we are able to make sure that we can provide the immediate needs that clients need to more working towards more long-term resources. And all of that takes a community. It really does take a community. And lastly, there is the human trafficking hotline that we definitely work very close with. We're always in communication with them, and helping us access resources, plane tickets to get clients from different states to Wisconsin, because they've left trafficking situations. This is how we are really working close with the National Trafficking Hotline. And of course, we get calls through our Latina Resource Center crisis line. And this is our team. So it's a lot of information. And I will be more than happy to make sure that I share this PowerPoint. We have very specialized training just around labor trafficking, because it's just a very complicated issue, and especially because we're dealing with so much of the immigration matters of our workers. So thank you.
Well, we're just about at the end of our formal time, but Marianne, it's really up to you. Do you have a few minutes for questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I'm wondering if I could just start with one. Talk a little bit more, and you touched on this, about the relationship between the trafficker and the employer. I mean, are there situations where that kind of arm's length situation provides legal protection for the employer? You can say, I had no idea this was going on. This is terrible,
Yeah, that we hear that a lot. We do, where they don't think that they have any, that they're not responsible for that, because they just are so baffled that it even happened. But I've always argued the point that they know who they're business with. They know who they are working with, and so far, I think that they have to take greater initiative to learn more about who those contractors are. Have they been cited before? Have they received complaints before? Those are the things that it's due process, it's due diligence. If I'm gonna go into a work agreement with somebody or a contract with them, I need to know who I'm doing that with. And I think they try to say that just so that they don't get blamed for it. But we have a case where they're going after not only the contractor, but they're definitely going after the farmer.
Well, that's interesting. And what do you think is the driver of this kind of labor trafficking? I mean, is it just cost? Is it you get away with getting labor for ridiculously low wages? Or not that it's in any way an excuse, but I mean, are there legitimate workers available? We hear a lot about, particularly during COVID, while we can't get people to take these jobs. So
I think that this is a very specialized workforce. I think that it's very hard work. That I think that it calls out for a very specialized workforce to come in, to be able to endure the elements and the type of hard work that goes into harvesting and taking care of our land and our animals and everything else. And I will say it, foreign workers is cheap labor, cheap. We are a country that is addicted to cheap labor. They are workers that are seasonal, so they don't have to pay any type of benefits for the worker. They almost are absolved from any responsibility for them when they're injured. And so there's very little that goes into really putting any type of resources to help somebody really thrive. And so why would we do that when the workers are only here 4 or 5 months, maybe 3 months, and they move out there's very little accountability for the worker. And they're great workers. These are individuals that are coming from, workers will say, I will make in 1 month $100 and something in Mexico, and I have to feed my entire family with this. And I can make this 5 times more in 1 week, if I can, and so they sell them this, you're gonna make, $900 a week. What worker's not ready to say, I will definitely come on board and I will work and I can do this to feed my family. And so when they come here, that is the first thing that when we interact with them, they say, all I wanted to do was just take care of my family. And the contractors know that. They know how vulnerable they are and how desperate they may be times because they're just so poor sometimes. So it's just the perfect grounds to do that.
well, we've got a question from Diana. If you'd like to pose your question, you can unmute and ask it. There's a question involving Haitians.
We haven't seen any Haitian workers. What we have, seen have been more of the Mexican workers. We're seeing that the dairy farms are having more Nicaraguenses from Nicaragua, Honduras. There's a big community in Fond du Lac of Hondureños. Chilton also is starting to have more a community of Hondureños, and so it's definitely changing. But yeah, the H2A too, we're seeing that Hondureños too are coming in as H2A workers, where it was predominantly Mexican workers.
Well, and I think you've kind of answered this, but the same questioner is asking about, for example, Venezuelans, so people from further down on the map.
Yeah, we actually have a case. We actually do have. We are working on a case and have been for a year of a group of from Venezuela. Yes, but they're not. They didn't come in as workers, and so I can't really speak on it as much just because it's still they're still the trial is going to begin soon. But But yeah, we do have some individuals from Venezuela.
Well, I would invite our audience members again to put any questions you may have in the chat. In the meantime, I've got another question. Is there a legislative solution you'd like to see to this? I mean, is there a change in the law that would help?
I think that I think that Biden had mentioned the possibilities, or there was a discussion of the workers having the ability, if they were coming into the country to work within a certain time, that there would be a possibility that they could adjust. I think that would be great to see. But I think certain changes to the H-2A policy also has to be looked at, because just because of how the visas are tied to that one particular employer and that particular contractor. And I think that has to be looked at much more closely. And if provide the opportunities for those ongoing H-2A workers who have come here over several seasons to also be provided the opportunity to potentially adjust and be able to have the opportunity to stay, I think is an important piece to it too. I think that the trafficking, the TVPA of 2000 really changed a lot about how we are talking about immigrants, workers' rights, and that it's not just about how we are looking at policies that can protect the workers, the hours, their hourly rates, their pay. But now we have a whole different element to show that it may not only just be the exploited worker, but this worker could potentially have been a victim of a much more serious crime. And so now we have this, we're able to do more to gain and put these two together so that we're able to hold a lot of those farmers or, and contractors accountable.
Well, looks like we've got another question here. Okay, Eric can we unmute, and if you'd like to pose your question, otherwise I can just read it for you.
Sure, I'll say it. Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for hosting. So yeah, from what I'm perceiving is that, contractors are deemed bad, right? And in your opinion, should contractors be outlawed and contracts be dealt with directly with the employers to hold, the abusers, if there are any, more easily responsible? So.
Yeah, that is a really an excellent question. I mean, part of why contractors have become such a big important piece of this all is that a lot of these contractors, they're able to speak the language. They're coming from, they know the regions and they know exactly where to recruit the workers, right? And so I think that there has to be greater oversight and much larger serious consequences and criminal charges do need to come to those contractors more so. I think the oversight of how they monitor contractors is where we are also failing. Because it could be a good business, right? It could be a good way of getting good workers that really want to come in, and this is the opportunity. But the way that it is right now, there is very little oversight and very little oversight over these contractors. So they do what they want in many ways and can manipulate, the policies to really hurt these workers, because the workers really don't understand everything. So there has to do a lot more with contractors for sure. I've met some contractors that are, they're pretty, they seem pretty good, seem pretty nice from the surface. They're, hey, listen, look at, they got their own rooms, look at, they have this. And so when they show us that, we're like, okay, you're legit, but, but I can't, but in the most part, it's just been a really difficult way of who's monitoring these guys, because it's not the farmers, that's for sure.
We've got another question about just if it matters which party in this country is in power. Have we seen any marked difference between one administration to the next?
That's a really great question. And I haven't, to be honest with you. I have not, I can't, it's been, this has been prevalent. This has been, a big issue. And I can't say that our caseload, our work was less when Obama was in, our administration or as our president, as compared to Trump. I think in the last administration, I think that they added a lot more to the rhetoric against immigrants in the way that they were treated when they would go to the more smaller rural areas, and how they were treated as workers. I think in general, the perception that people have, the community has about the workers that are the foreign workers is that they are here undocumented. That's the overall sense of it. When they're, when we start to talk about that those workers are here legally with work visas, authorized to work, their mouth drop. They're like, oh, they can do that, because their immediate thought is, they're here and they're just working our crops, and who cares about them most of the time.
Right. I'm wondering if you could give us an example. I mean, you mentioned, for example, the carnivals, and
Yeah.
Fairly or not, I think many people have sort of a mental image of a carnival operator, and it may not be, the most up and up business. Are there examples where employers we would have thought would not be, indulging in this kind of thing are? I mean, sort of, for want of a better word, more legit companies?
Again, the way that some of these companies, how they kind of open up, they look legit. So for the carnival workers, they can actually enter their business as an entertainment, under the entertainment industry, right? And so, so they're able to then recruit workers and state, we're only going to work in the state of Illinois, and we're going to work this carnival, and then, and this is where we're going to stay for next amount of time. And so what we found in one of our particular cases is that they had like different names for, they had different businesses that were under this person. So they had a landscaping business, an in a carnival business. It was in Chicago, in Texas, but they were bringing workers to Texas, and it became really complicated to figure out, like, how did this person recruit all these workers from Central America? And so again, there's got to be something by far. But the policies for contractors, it has to be reviewed, because people can, the way that they can open up businesses has been really interesting to see. One of our particular cases, our clients were supposed to be where they were supposed to come to go to Chicago. And the moment that they came to Chicago, 2 cars were waiting for them, and they said, we're not going to Chicago. Then they ended up moving them to Wisconsin. They were like, what the heck's going on? Where are we going? And so it's scary, for them to have experienced that.
Well, we don't want to keep you too long, but I've got another question. Diana, would you like to ask your question regarding sort of the rural environment in which much of this happens? just want to unmute. Well, just in the interest of time, there's actually a few questions that are in discussion touching on this subject about the environment that it, for want of a better word, is more conservative and perhaps is on other issues less welcoming to people from elsewhere coming here. But how does that play into that? I mean, if you may not be supportive of immigration generally, but in this particular example, you find sort of a aberration in the attitudes.
I think that, I think that what I've gathered and from what our work that we're doing in Wisconsin and what we've done in Missouri, which has all been very rural, is that they really, I used to think that it was kind of like a little bit of a cliche when we say they're invisible workers, they truly become very invincible. They're invisible. They don't really care to interact with them, to really, reach out to them. I think that they really are kind of perceived as the help. And as long as they are out there and they're not, in kind of interacting and going into their community, they're not, that's okay, and I think that because they're so isolated, because they have very minimal times to travel into town. I think people in general know that they're there, but because they're so far away, they can tolerate them. They can tolerate the workers. But I don't think that there is any concern for the workers to say, hey, wow, it's pretty hot outside today. I wonder how those workers are, do they have water? I don't think that comes into the minds of people, because I think that in general, that's their job. I think that's how they're perceived. And so, so again, I think that because they are so far away from, in general, the whole overall community, and it's just really hard for them to be seen as a part of the community or as a community member. They're just temporary.
And that brings up a good point. I mean, in your experience, have you ever seen local people doing this kind of work on any kind of large scale?
Never have I seen it. And when we went to Kennett, Missouri, and I think I shared one of the pictures. I think there was a bus. There was a picture of a bus. I think it was a picture of a bus in there. If you can just picture a huge school bus, okay? Just picture a huge school bus. We were in Kennett, Missouri, and the watermelons, they grow watermelons, and that's one of the big crops in Kennett, Missouri. And they are the source of the watermelons that they sell to Walmart. It's interesting. They're kind of the biggest producer for watermelons in Walmart. And I'm like, I will not buy a Walmart watermelon ever again. But the issue is that the bus, so H-2A workers are supposed to get paid hourly, not piecework. And if it is going to be piecework, it has to be noted into their contract, but primarily they're paid hourly. When we were to Kennett, Missouri, these workers were paid by piecework. So they had to fill the entire bus of watermelons. So it takes a crew to cut, to pick and put it into the bus. And it takes about 6 people. We saw the production, how it was done. And so they were getting paid $80 per bus to fill an entire bus with watermelons. $80, which they had to share. They had to split that between 6 workers. And that was the entire day. And it was just amazing to see how, how the changes of the work conditions occurred. And we were able to see that kind of hiding a little bit, but it's hot. It's 100 degrees. They didn't have any water. There was one bottled water for the entire work crew. And so it's just, it's hard work. And I was getting bit by mosquitoes. I was, in the hot sun. This is work that we need to uphold our workers. We need to care for our workers. We need to show the greatest compassion and love for these workers, because of them, our beautiful salads that we get to love and eat and enjoy, we see the outcomes of that. We're enjoying and the fruits of their labor, of everything that they work so hard for. And it's not easy. And no one can do that job so easily. There's no way that we could see a regular person work that job. It just wouldn't.
So getting back to my earlier question.
Sorry about that.
If the ultimate employer is Walmart, is there no way? I mean, obviously they you would think would be somewhat sensitive to their image. Can pressure be brought to bear in that regard?
I mean, I think, yes. I mean, if you look at what Immokalee workers in Florida put a lot of pressure on Coca-Cola and Taco Bell, because Taco Bell was one of the main businesses that relied on the tomatoes that were coming out of the Immokalee workers, and they organized and they put pressure on Taco Bell and Coca-Cola to change and support the better pay for the workers, better treatment for the workers, because one of the largest trafficking, one of the first really public trafficking cases came out of the Immokalee workers. And in talking to Lauda, who was the executive director at the time, it still is an executive director, said we will not do business with them. We definitely are organizing. We're organizing the workers. And so there are opportunities to put that kind of pressure on these agencies to do the same.
And is there any role for, like the United Farm Workers? And how do they interact in this situation?
They definitely, so we, Lupe Martinez and several of the other directors are involved in meeting with National Farm Workers, with Arturo Rodriguez, and with Justice Farm Workers Program, I think, is another one that's coming out of Washington. His mind escapes me. But they definitely play a very big role in helping the Department of Labor, the Administration of Department of Labor, to really look at changing policies and working on developing policies for the workers. They play a big role in that. I have not had that opportunity to do that, but I have called out on them when we were working on the case of the young man that died in the fields in Georgia and needed to get justice for the other workers. So, so I hope that I can be able to sit there on that table someday, because I have a lot to say.
Well, and we would be very happy to have you spend the rest of the evening saying it, but I think we've been, very greedy with your time.
No
So
problem. No
I'll
problem.
leave you with one last question. Other than appreciating when we enjoy that wonderful salad that is the fruits of very hard labor from these people, what can the average citizen do to try to address this situation?
I think that taking the time to just to be here today and learn about this is like one of the biggest steps that anybody can take, because one, we are able to counter the idea and the thought that the workers are here because they're stealing people's jobs and they're just coming here so easily. And that's not the case. the workers that are coming here having to invest a great deal of their own physical body and mind and heart and separated from families so that we can thrive as a country. You know, and so that's one. And two is that understanding labor trafficking, that when we are driving in these rural areas, that we can look at the workers and think about, you know, and look at them very differently, and that there is always potential of these workers to be in very, very dangerous and horrible working conditions and working in living conditions. And so it's important to learn more about what trafficking is, because if they're seeing somebody who they potentially is, you know, isolated or by himself or foreigner and doesn't know where they're at, that's a big indicator. And do the kind thing, help them, get them connected to us, because it's important. We can always, find ways of how we can reach that worker. So this is important. That's a good way to start. And follow us on Facebook, and we will be doing more Facebook Lives, and you know, we're definitely going to be doing more to elevate the issue of labor trafficking in Wisconsin.
Well, that's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you.
Mariana Rodriguez from Mumos. And to our audience, thank you for sticking with us. And I would invite you back on April 7th.
Nicole, should I send you the PowerPoint to you, or who do I send the PowerPoint to?
You could send it to me, and then
Okay.
I'll share it around with the organizers.
Sounds great. Thank you. Have a great night. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.